Namaste, Dr. Kundan. So nice to see you. And what time is it in the US now? Must be very late.
It's 9:30, yes.
Such a joy to see you, Anji.
Yeah, me too. I was just wondering if I could get the grid view. That way I will be able to see everyone.
Can you see everyone now? Or are you on the speaker view?
I'm able to see, but I don't want the speaker view. I want the grid view. Is it possible?
Yes, I think
I'm basically seeing the announcement on the screen, and I'm not able to see you as well as others. This is very good. Much better. Now I have gallery view. Fabulous.
Namaste, Dr. Kundan, and we are on the 5th day of the FTP. And the theme, the Vishya, is characteristic Indian epistemology, and this is session 2 of the day. The earlier session was with Professor V.N. Jhaji on Introduction to Pramanas. And now we have the Guru Shishya Parampara, and who else but you could take us through, who has lived through this praxis and the philosophy of the Guru Shishya Parampara. I would just take a minute or so to introduce you, and for that we will just need to put the slide back so that we could read your introduction very accurately. Srihari, can we just put the slide on Dr. Kundanji's introduction? Dr. Kundan Singh holds a doctorate in Humanities and Concentration in East-West Psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies, San Francisco, California. After having served as a core faculty at Sophia University for close to a decade, where he taught at the doctoral level, Kundan Singh ji joins the Hindu University of America as a core doctoral faculty, a scholar practitioner of integral yoga and the darshana of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. He has taught in the areas of integral philosophy and psychology, contemporary and traditional Vedanta, Theravada, and Mahayana Buddhism, postmodern philosophy, philosophy of science and epistemology, critical thought and deconstruction, post-colonial studies in psychology, cultural and cross-cultural psychology, Indian psychology, yogic psychology, and transpersonal, that is spiritual psychology, among a few others. He is a senior fellow with Hindupedia, where he diligently is involved with changing the representation of Hinduism and India in grade school textbooks in California and across the US. He has co-authored a book with Krishna Vaishwari titled Making Children Hinduphobic, a critical review of McGraw-Hill's world history textbooks, and written author work titled The Evolution of Integral Yoga, Sri Aurobindo, Sri Ramakrishna, and Swami Vivekananda in 2008. He is also the Vice President of the Cultural Integration Fellowship, an institution in San Francisco inspired by the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And for me, he's my teacher, he's my mentor. I did a course with him last year from the Hindu University of America on anti-colonialism and post-colonialism. And on the lighter note, I am yet to pass that exam. My paper is yet to be submitted. But yes, he's also been on the advisory of the Department of Contemplative and Behavioral Sciences at Shiksha University. I remember he flew down all the way from the US to be with us and to guide us on creating this unique department. It's a personal joy, and we welcome you once again, Kundanji, to take us through the Guru Shishya Parampara. Namaste.
Thank you, Richaji. I was just wondering if I could see some more faces. I don't use slides, so I'm not going to share the screen. It's going to be an extempore presentation. So if I'm able to see more faces, it will definitely be better. So thank you very much.
I would request all our teachers to please put on your videos, which is an ask also. And it is also a feedback from all our teachers, all our faculty, that the videos could be please kept on. Yes, yes, Dr. Kundan.
So Richaji mentioned that I teach anti-colonialism and post-colonialism at the Hindu University of America. So why don't I start the conversation today, on a topic which actually falls within the domain of post-colonial studies. I'm pretty much sure that it must have become very evident that the very reason why we are even having this workshop on this particular topic is because our knowledge systems were brutally ransacked after 1835. The intervention was quite deliberate and systematic. Now, before the intervention happened, there was also the creation of a particular narrative. Very similar to how Iraq was invaded. Before the invasion of Iraq, the news was spread that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And once the narrative caught on, the invasion happened. And later, of course, it was found out that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. So before this brutalization of the Indian knowledge system happened, before the eradication of the indigenous educational system happened, there was this very sinister narrative which was actually created on India and Hinduism in particular. And the individual who did this was named James Mill. He was basically a journalist by profession. And in between 1806 and 1817, he wrote 3 volumes of this particular book, History of British India. And in the first volume itself, he has written 7 chapters on Hindus. And he has divided the Hindus left, right, and center. In a nutshell, you can say that he created a certain narrative on Hindus and Hinduism. And this narrative, over a period of time, has become the normative narrative. It has become the dominant narrative, to the extent that you find the reflections of this narrative on discussions on Hinduism anywhere you go, around the world, as well as in India. The reflections are found in NCERT books also. That's a whole different topic altogether. And, I'm not going to go into those details because the topic is very, very different. But why am I bringing this up? That is the question that we need to refer to. While he was castigating the Hindus and dividing the Hindus, he did not leave the Guru Shishya Parampara also. He demonized the Guru Shishya Parampara as well and described the system as one where oppression by the Guru of the Shishya was written all over the place. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from his book, from the chapter Manners of the Hindus, and you will realize, the extent of damage that he has done to the narrative. He writes, quote, "The condition of the student much more closely resembles that of an European apprentice than that of a pupil in literature. He dwells in the house of his preceptor and tends him with the most respectful assiduity. He is commanded to exert himself in all acts useful to his teachers, and of course performs the part of an assistant in all the offices of religion. As he who digs deep with a spade comes to a spring of water, so the student who humbly serves his teacher attains the knowledge which lies deep in his teacher's mind. The quote is all right, but look at the spin that he has given to this quote. Upon the student of the priestly order, a peculiar burden or distinction is imposed to acquire daily his food by begging. I'm skipping a few paragraphs, and then he writes again. On important occasions, as on other occasions, the attention of the Hindu is much more engaged by frivolous observances than by objects of utility. While the directions laid down respecting the instruction of the pupil are exceedingly few and insignificant, the forms according to which he must pay his duty to the master are numerous, minute, and emphatically enjoined. And then he goes on, and anyone who's interested in reading the details can look up the chapter, Manner of the Hindus in History of British India, Volume 1, and you will get the extent of demonization that he has gone into. Now, there are many educated Indians, even today, who do not look at this relationship, this very sacred relationship, with any kind of respect. And of course, the times have changed. We have also seen a lot of charlatans as gurus. But today we are going to get into the tradition and basically understand how this parampara, this tradition, was actually dealt with. What were the observances surrounding this tradition or parampara? What I have done for us today is that I have taken some selections from this particular book, Vivek Chudamani. The author is Sri Shankaracharya. And in this particular book, a wonderful relationship between Guru and Shishya is actually described. Now, when we will go into the details of this relationship, there are two things that will become absolutely clear. One is, what are the characteristics of a Shishya? It is commonly asked, how do I find a Guru? And my answer is that if you will fulfill certain conditions, the Guru will emerge. And if one is fulfilling the right conditions, then one also will come across the right Guru and will not come across any charlatan. Now, this is extremely important from the perspective of epistemology. I did not watch Professor Jha's presentation in totality, but I saw parts of it. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting him when I say this, that he was looking at the intellectual pursuits of epistemology. I'm going to bring another addition to that. I'm going to bring another layer to that. And I am going to speak about the yogic pursuit. in the pursuit of knowledge or epistemology. I want to clarify or emphasize at this point in time that yogic pursuit of knowledge begins when the subject-object dichotomy collapses. Western epistemology is based in a very strict dichotomy of subject and object, subjective and objective. It is not that subject and object are not discussed within our traditions, they certainly are. But particularly the traditions which will be considered yogic. And by that, I mean different schools of Vedanta, Buddhism, Jainism, Sufism. You will certainly find discussions where the collapse of the subject-object dichotomy or binary becomes extremely important. This is a unique characteristic of Indian epistemology. The yogic pursuit of knowledge actually begins when collapse of dichotomy and binary happens. And why is it so? Mind essentially operates in binaries. It essentially operates in dualities and dichotomies. According to the yogic tradition, there are many, many realms of consciousness that are beyond the mind. So the mind has to be transcended and binaries have to be transcended. And in order for the binaries to get transcended, an essential condition is the collapse of binaries. So that is why, in all these traditions, you will find different variations of what the Buddhists called as pratitya samudpad, where it is described that one half of the binary is intricately entwined with the other half. One does not exist without the other. True does not exist without false. Right does not exist without wrong. Day does not exist without night. Mountains do not exist without valleys. The existence of one is important for the existence of the other. If day disappears, night also will disappear. We will not be able to conceptualize night if day disappears. It is basically in the contrast that we are able to observe night. So in intellectual pursuit, usually what happens is that we think that right is right, wrong is wrong, true is true, false is false. And after a certain point in time, particularly if we are interested in spiritual literature, we recognize that one does not really exist without the other. So this entire approach, which is based in the dichotomy of true and false, begins to move away from our system. It is not that the pursuit of truth collapses, but the pursuit of truth acquires a very different dimension than one which is located or positioned in the binary of right and wrong, true and false. So this is the kind of epistemology that I'm going to talk about. And within this context, I'm going to talk about the characteristics of a seeker and the characteristics of a guru. So what are some of the characteristics of a student or a seeker as per Sri Shankaracharya's Vivek Chudamani? The first thing that he says is that the student must have Vivek, the capacity or the power to make a discernment. And what kind of discernment is he talking about? He's talking about Nitya Anitya Vastu Vivek. What is eternal from what is time bound, the distinction. The discernment between what is eternal from what is time bound. An important condition. In our knowledge pursuit, many of us are blessed with this pursuit, from time to time. We begin to understand after attaining certain maturity that whatever we are doing, whatever we are engaging in, after a certain point in time is going to disappear. It is going to come to an end. Whatever we are doing on this planet is ephemeral. It is transitory. It is not long lasting. This kind of feeling or understanding usually happens, when one experiences the death of a significant one or the collapse of a significant relationship. We begin to inquire, into these questions. What is real? What is eternal? Is there anything which is eternal, or everything is time bound? Is everything transitory? Is everything ephemeral? And so on and so forth. So the first condition. The second condition, which is interrelated with the first one, is vairagya. When there is a certain kind of detachment that occurs, one does not feel involved in day-to-day activities. It's almost as if one has been consumed by existential angst. One is removed from day-to-day activities. And Sri Shankaracharya says that in fact, all yogis say that when a condition like that appears, then that condition should be nurtured and fostered for a certain period of time. In vairagya, what also happens is that consciousness, which is naturally oriented on the outside, begins to turn inwards. So instead of seeking knowledge on the outside, one begins to look within. One begins to explore within. And gradually, one begins to find out that there's a lot to learn about oneself. It's a whole different book that basically opens up. And then there are 6 different psychological characteristics that are described. The first one is Sama. Resolution in the mind. The mind needs to come to certain peace. It needs to find peace within oneself and needs to take a resolve in that the seeker has to find out what the truth is, what the eternal reality is. The appearance of which began with the question as discussed in Nitya Anitya Vastu Vivek. This process is very progressive, if you will, because once this kind of attribute sets in, then there are other requirements also that will need to be fulfilled. Here comes the importance of Dhamma. Comes from the word Dhamman. Restraint. Restraint of what? Organs of perception and organs of action. So just like the mind, before the setting of Vairagya is externally oriented, these organs are also very attached to the things on the outside. And they want to move towards things that are on the outside. But they have to be restrained, just like a tortoise basically brings all his limbs into the shell and rests in peace. A very similar kind of activity needs to be performed. And that comes through Dhamma of organs of perception as well as organs of action. The third psychological condition is Uparati. Comes from the word Rati. Rati means attachment. It means involvement. Attachment and involvement with various things on the outside. The detachment is a necessary condition. Uparati. You have to remove yourself from the things or the activities that you are attached to or attached with. Then there's another condition, Titiksha. Titiksha is about gaining composure and developing the capacity of remaining unmoved in instances of pleasure as well as pain. Developing some sort of an equanimity or neutrality, if you will. Then there's a very important condition that needs to be developed within the student, Shraddha. It is loosely translated as faith or trust. In the teachings of the Shastra and the teachings of the Guru that one may have come in contact with. Trusting that the principles that are enumerated by them will lead the seeker to the desired end. This unshakable Shraddha is extremely important. And if you will look into the descriptions of different spiritual teachers and even religious traditions, it is said that you must abstain from doubt. Doubt is like a corrosive which spoils the spiritual practice or the seeking of an individual. So Shraddha needs to become absolutely stable. It needs to burn in an unflickering way, if you will. And then the last psychological condition is one of samadhan, a complete resolve and resolution in the mind. One is absolutely steadfast that he or she is going to pursue the path. There isn't any anxiety within the system. There isn't any flickerings going on in the system. One has attained that stability, if you will. Now, if these conditions are fulfilled by a student, the Shastra says that he or she will find his or her guru for sure. And who's the guru within the tradition? Not an ordinary one. An individual who is a realized soul, who has known Brahma, who has come in contact with Brahma, knows Brahma experientially, does not know Brahma intellectually. So Guru in this tradition is not an ordinary being. He or she is Ved himself or herself. And then there are some other conditions that are also described. Must be well read in the Shastras. You know, I would say that this perhaps was true when our ancient knowledge system was intact and it had not been assaulted upon. But now you'll find, you know, a plethora of saints and sages and yogis who may not have the knowledge of the Shastras or the intellectual knowledge of the Shastras. They know the Shastras experientially and they know the Shastras in their being. One who does not have papa is papa mukta, does not have any stain of any kind of sin, is absolutely spotless. An individual who's not afflicted by desires, has transmuted the desires, has transformed the desires. See, these are very, very important things. If you will keep these things in mind after having fulfilled the conditions that we spoke about earlier, finding the real guru will not be difficult. An individual who is calm, who is an ocean of compassion. I repeat, an ocean of compassion. Is compassionate just without any reason. Unconditionally compassionate. And the last characteristic that Sri Shankaracharya describes is a helpful friend to seekers who approach him or her with respect. You know, I have deliberately been using her because in the past, we have had many women saints and sages. We have them currently as well. particularly, people who have the feminist orientation would want to recognize that, that this was deliberate on my part. So, this was about the Guru Shishya Parampara from the spiritual perspective, from the yogic perspective. Most of us here are teachers in our respective professions. So what are some of the things that we can actually follow with our students? And in that matter, I will take help of some of the things that Sri Aurobindo has spoken about. Sri Aurobindo has given 3 principles of education. The first one is very radical, something on which we must inquire and ruminate. He says, nothing can be taught. Usually we teachers are very eager to teach our students. We just want to drill whatever we have learned in our life. We just want to pass them on. We want to transmit all our learnings to the student. Sri Aurobindo is very radical in saying this. He says nothing can be taught. And this is absolutely beautiful, because what he says is that knowledge is latent in all of us. It is residing in all of us. And we teachers are basically midwives, or we should behave as midwives to the emergence of knowledge which is residing within. So what is it that we should ideally be doing? And this is something, which I've done quite a bit in my life, and I've seen positive results of this. Create the right kind of condition. Create conducive atmosphere around the student and allow things to emerge. There's another very important principle, that he talks about. He says that a teacher should take a student from near to far, from what is to what will be. So, it works very well when you approach the student from where he or she is. Teaching, in my understanding, is a non-egoic exercise. Usually teachers teach for themselves, whereas this activity is not for oneself. It is for the students. And when it is for the students, you would always want to find out, figure out where he or she is. Once you will get a sense of where he or she is, then very gradually you will be able to take him or her to where you want that individual to be after a period of time. Once again, it is basically honoring the inner constitution of the individual. See, when education comes from without to within, from outside to inside, it is not education. It is training. Most of us lack this distinction between education and training because of the mechanical world that we have come to inhabit, we have become more interested in training people. Whereas education is once again, addressing what is within, and from within, basically, to proceed outside. The third principle, that he talks about, and we have already touched upon this, is that the mind should be consulted. Consult the mind of the students. Involve them. Incorporate them as much as you can. Things begin to acquire a very different dimension. Now, given that I have shared, these things, I would definitely want to leave a lot of time for interactions. But before I do that, I want to read a few lines of his from this book, The Synthesis of Yoga. In this book, he has written a chapter called The Four Aids. And in Four Aids, he is describing the teacher as well, as one of the aids in the progress of yoga. He writes, the teacher of the integral yoga will follow as far as he may the method of the teacher within us. He will lead the disciple through the nature of the disciple. We discussed that. Teaching, example, influence. I repeat. Teaching, example, influence. These are three instruments of the Guru. But the wise teacher will not seek to impose himself or his opinions on the passive acceptance of the receptive mind. These are very important principles. These are very, very important principles. Particularly when students come to you, they are in a very receptive state of mind. And because of the deference that they show, it becomes extremely important that we teachers handle them very, very mindfully. And we do not be mindless in terms of our interaction with them. Because, because that relationship, because of the cultural context in which we are embedded, the parampara still continues. Still students look up to their teachers in a very, very differential way. And whenever, I would say, we teachers find that kind of a situation, that in such a situation, we really should tread that relationship very, very carefully, or we should engage in that relationship very, very carefully. He will throw in only what is productive and sure as a seed, which will grow under divine fostering within. Let ideas germinate within the students. Just throw the seeds. Once again, do not impose. Do not come to that individual with a force. Allow the natural process to take over. These are some of the very, very good principles for teaching and education. He will seek, look at the beauty of the words. He will seek to awaken much more than to instruct. Will seek to awaken much more than to instruct. I always tell my students that they will forget the words. Most of us, even if we have been very good in mathematics, probably do not remember most of the stuff that we did in the 7th grade. Right? But whatever has been reflected upon, whatever has been chewed upon, that stays with us. And that is the kind of education that we should be thinking about. That is the kind of instruction that we need to be speaking about. And if we engage in something like this, we are following that parampara that, that we were talking about. See, didactic way of teaching is actually a very Western form of teaching. When Christianity was alive and kicking, then the masses were held. The preachers, they preached from the pulpit. The situation is not very different today, in the secular world. The teachers come to a podium and then they preach from there. What is a quintessential Indian way of teaching? Dialogical. It is dialogical. Look at all our ancient texts. They're all dialogical. Even the divine, appeared and had a dialogue with Arjuna. Krishna is not imposing his knowledge on Arjuna. It's a dialogue. There's freedom to question. So when a student questions, he or she is not making an affront upon us. It's an engagement. It's a dialogue that needs to be followed. He will give a method as an aid, as a utilizable device, not as an imperative formula or a fixed routine. And he will be on his guard against any turning of the means into a limitation, against the mechanizing of process. His whole business is to awaken the divine light and set working of the divine force, of which he himself is only a means and an aid, a body or a channel. So how much time do I have? Can someone tell me how much time I have? Hari?
About 30 minutes, 40 minutes.
So, Richaji, should we have questions, or should I go ahead and complete, two more passages?
Another 10-15 minutes of
another
your
10-15 minutes,
your speech,
yeah,
and then
okay,
20-25 minutes of question and answers.
Sure.
If that is okay.
Absolutely. I can go on and on, but I wanted to have some dialogue.
Yes, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Yeah.
The example is more powerful than the instruction, but it is not an example of the outward acts, nor that of personal character, which is of most importance. They have their place and their utility, but what will most stipulate aspiration in others is the central fact of the divine realization within him, governing his whole life, an inner state, and his activities. The more realized we are, the more we will be able to transmit these things to the students. Once again, these are not about just words alone, but what is the power which basically comes behind the words? And that power is only acquired through practice. Walking the talk becomes very, very important, And in fact, the more you will walk, less you will need to talk. This is the kind of influence that Sri Aurobindo is talking about. How do we influence our students? Students are very, very perceptive, and they're very, they're keen observers of the students, of the teachers. In fact, my understanding is that in the first class, from kindergarten to the postgraduate level, in the first class, a teacher is always tested by his or her students, always. It's an unconscious process. And you know why that happens? The students want to have a feel of how far the teacher is going to go with them in terms of the internal support that they are seeking. And that is why, the moment the teacher enters, prodding begins. Sometimes directly and sometimes metaphorically. And from my experience, I would say that every class is actually, or rather every course is made or broken in the first session itself. So if you're able to win over your students in the first session itself, you're going to have a seamless time. And this is the kind of influence, that Sri Aurobindo is talking about, This is the universal and essential element. The rest belongs to individual person and circumstance. It is this dynamic realization that the sadhak must feel and reproduce in himself according to his own nature. He need not strive after an imitation from outside, which may be sterilizing rather than productive of right and natural fruits. Once again, the emphasis comes on the inner. Unfortunately, in post-colonial India, we have lost sight of this. Our education has become extremely externalized. So particularly, for a new institution like Rashtram, which is trying to do new things, it is also important that we figure out what our ancient pedagogy has been. Our ancient pedagogy has been one of interaction and inclusion. And this is something, which is followed in village schools even now, even today, where, the Western influence is not as much as it is in the cities. Invariably, in primary and middle schools, you'll find teachers enter the classroom and begin the class with questions. And through this interaction, through question and answer, they start unfolding the class. It is also very creative, Only that teacher whose concepts and fundamentals are absolutely clear will be able to engage in this kind of a practice. In fact, teaching for a teacher actually happens outside the class. It's not when you are in the classroom. It is what you have done earlier, what you have done before, how much you have thought about things, how much you have internalized things, how much of a creative individual you are in responding to your students. And all these things, once again, I will say, is part of the Guru Shishya Parampara. Because questions and answers are happening in here and now. they are not predetermined questions. They're not predetermined questions. Just out of the blue, some pressing question will come up. And a teacher will only have an answer to the question if he or she has experienced that particular thing or has thought about it. If he or she hasn't, the answer will not be there. And in my understanding, I think there is nothing wrong in saying that I do not know. You know, I'm going to do my research and come back to you. Teaching in humility is very important, and it can be very endearing. It's not important that, you know, that we manifest, that we know everything. That is not important. Do we have the humility of saying, well, you know, I have not thought about it. I have not studied this. But I take your question. I'm going to do my research and I'm going to come back to you. Just last two paragraphs and then I will stop. Influence is more important than example. Influence is not the outward authority of the teacher over his disciple, but the power of his contact, of his presence, of the nearness of his soul to the soul of another, infusing into it, even though in silence, that which he himself is and possesses. This is the supreme sign of the master, for the greatest master is much less a teacher than a presence, pouring the divine consciousness and its constituting light and power and purity and bliss into all who are receptive around him. And it shall also be a sign of the teacher of the integral yoga that he does not arrogate to himself guruhood. Listen to this. That he does not arrogate to himself guruhood. And very true to his word, Sri Aurobindo abstained from it. You know, he did not want to be called a guru. In a humanly vain and self-exalting spirit, his work, if he has one, is a trust from above. He himself a channel, a vessel, or a representative. He is a man helping his brothers, a child leading children, a light kindling other lights, an awakened soul awakening souls, at highest a power or presence of the divine, calling to him other powers of the divine. I think with those words, you know, I'll close and we'll get ready to interact and discourse.
Thank you so much, Kundanji.
Thank you. Thank you, Harijit.
Thank you. Could we take some questions now, with your permission?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
We have Dr. Mansi ji. I would request her to unmute and ask her question.
Namaskar. I'm sorry the camera does not work properly. You won't be able to see me though it is open. Sir, I'm really thankful to you for sharing your insights in this topic, and I must say that you have presented in the most beautiful and the calm way possible. I am so impressed. Sir, I want to put it forward this way, that first thing that when you were talking, I was, with each word, I was mirroring myself. And, but I want to put it this way, that those students look into their guru in a very, very differential way. But what is the reason that the Guru Shishya Parampara, it is dying in the modern world, or it is being reduced to nothing? These days, students at the college level, they think the teachers are, they're just friends, or, they treat it this way. I am not sure. Is it because of the acts and actions of the Guru, or is it because of the Shishya, or it is the way the culture is being developing, or I am not sure.
Yeah.
And
I think it is it's the last point that you're raising. See, this nefarious intervention by the Britishers in our culture was made 200 years ago, and unfortunately, in post-colonial India, we haven't really neutralized the effect of what was put in place. So this narrative is still proliferating, and it's still bringing people, into its clutches. And as students come into this kind of narrative in conscious or unconscious manner, they basically, get disconnected from the tradition. And what happens in this process is that the sanctity, which is there between the student and the teacher, gets badly fractured. It's a very sanctimonious relationship. We must understand that. And perhaps I feel that we teachers will need to take that step, and maybe we'll have to swallow a lot of poison, like Shiva did, in order to bring about that transformation.
And I think so the way you have, yes, sir, the way you have presented, I want to say, I think this is going to rejuvenate the system. This is going to, if the Guru starts feeling this way, the Shishya, I think, will already start feeling this way. This could be rejuvenated the way you have presented.
I personally feel that that we need to teach our students with unconditional love.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's difficult to practice, but I think more we engage in this, more transformation will occur. I've tested these principles, so I can say that even today it works. And my testing happened in India. I would not take the name of the institution, but I see that it still works. If we as teachers bring love, affection, and compassion towards our students, and if we are able to infuse in them, seeking of knowledge, then they start working with you.
Yes, sir. And I'm sure you're.
I'll just give you one example.
Yes, sir.
It was in the same institution. Again, I will not take neither the name of the student nor the name of the place. So I had to teach history, to the students over there. And when I went to the class, I began with the history of that particular place, that particular city. And, and within no time, I had the ears of the students. And most of the faculty within that institution would tell me that students are actually not interested in learning. But how do we infuse that? And it reminds me of the principles which I unconsciously applied at that point in time, which we discussed earlier. Taking the students from near to far. Take the students from where they are, to where you want them to be. So make your teaching contextual. See what is going to help them, in their pursuits, in their quests.
And I'm sure the way you have, and the way the content that you have shared with us, it is definitely going to improve my teaching at least. Thank you so very much, sir. I'm so impressed. Thank you. And thanks to the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
you. May I request Professor Pankaj Ji to go next?
Hari ji, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, son.
Now we are not.
Question कि जिस जमाने में we had the Guru Drona, then he was aware कि मेरे लिए भीम है, इसको ऐसे करना है क्योंकि गदा में एक्सपर्ट है। अर्जुन को मुझे
आपकी आवाज कट रही है।
पैशन, एबिलिटी एंड फेथ, उसके बेसिस पे आप निकालते थे कि इसका स्वभाव क्या है, स्वधर्मा क्या है, उसको आगे कैसे ले आना। मॉडल बनाया था जिसका नाम था IDP, इंडिविजुअल डेवलपमेंट प्लान। उस बच्चे को बताओ तुम्हें यहाँ से यहाँ जाना है, मछली को तैरना है, गिलहरी को कूदना है पेड़ पे। बट अब वो जो मॉडल है काफी दूषित सा हो रहा है, क्योंकि अब ये जमाना आ गया है कि भाई हर चीज को ब्रॉड बेस्ड एजुकेशन देना है, हर एक को ये करना है। और यूनिवर्सिटीज में इतने हजारों बच्चे होते हैं, तो उसमें ये कॉन्सेप्ट जो पहले सिस्टम था IDP वाला, पहले जब छोटे गुरु कुछ कम लोग होते थे, उनका फोकस रिलेशन था, तो इस मॉडल को कैसे आगे बढ़ाया जाए, क्योंकि इसके बिना सर होता नहीं है। जैसे आप जितना भी डिजिटल कर लो, लेकिन जो होता ना कि टच एंड फील वाला इशू जो होता है, और होता क्या है कि टीचर, हम लोग कई बार टीचर लेवल पे रह गए, गुरु नहीं बन पाए। जैसे मैं बताऊं, कल अनुराधा जी ने टॉक दिया, वो खुद इतनी इंस्पायर्ड थी, उनसे बहुत अच्छा लगा। आपने कुंदन जी, आपने बड़ा अच्छा किया, इट वाज रियली ग्रेट। तो इस तरह का इंस्पिरेशन हम कैसे लाएं, और जो हमें इंडिविजुअल लेवल पे देना है, वो हम ये बड़ा जो कमोडिटाइज्ड वर्ल्ड हो गया, जिसमें आप मास प्रोडक्शन की बात कर रहे हो, देयर आर प्राइवेट यूनिवर्सिटीज हु आर हैविंग 15-20,000 स्टूडेंट, तो उसमें वो हो नहीं पाता जहाँ एक एक बच्चे का हम ध्यान रख के कर पाए। तो इसमें आपका निर्देशन क्या रहेगा?
जी, मेरा ये मानना है जी मेरा ये मानना है कि छोटे क्लासेस का होना बहुत जरूरी है
जी।
जैसे अगर आप नालंदा यूनिवर्सिटी का भी अगर आप रेशियो अगर आप देख लें, तो मेरे ख्याल से टीचर स्टूडेंट रेशियो 1:8 था। और यहाँ ग्रेजुएट लेवल में जब मैं सोफिया यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ा रहा था, तो हम लोग अपने क्लासेस में 14 स्टूडेंट से ज़्यादा नहीं लेते थे। और अभी मैं हिंदू यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ अमेरिका में भी मैंने ये ज्वाइन करने के समय में ही मैंने ये कहा था कि मैं 14 स्टूडेंट से ज़्यादा एक क्लास में नहीं लूँगा, क्योंकि आप जिस इंटरेक्शन की बात कर रहे हैं, अगर हम इसको कमर्शियलाइज कर दें तो ये पूरी परंपरा जो है वो चौपट हो जाती है। उसके लिए समय होना बहुत जरूरी है, और अगर टीचर को समय नहीं रहेगा तो फिर ये इंटरेक्शन कहाँ होगा। तो इनफैक्ट जो नई पद्धति लोग लाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, तो उस पद्धति में भी ये बहुत जरूरी है कि इसका कमर्शियलाइजेशन जो है वो कम से कम किया जाए। देखिए, हमारे पुराने समय में अगर हम पुरानी अपनी संस्कृति को अगर हम देखें, तो ये पूरा सिस्टम जो है वो स्टेट और कम्युनिटी सपोर्टेड था। इंस्टीट्यूशंस जो हैं वो अपने लिए रेवेन्यू जनरेट नहीं करते थे। तो हमको ये वापस जो है उसमें जाना पड़ेगा कि जो टीचर्स हैं उनका कंसर्न वो विशुद्ध बिल्कुल शिक्षा से ही होना चाहिए, और बाकी चीजें जो हैं वो जो इंस्टीट्यूशन है या जो कम्युनिटी है उसको उसका ध्यान रखना पड़ेगा।
सर, आपकी बात बहुत अच्छी है, लेकिन मेरा एक छोटा सा इसमें बात है सर, कि जैसे वो जमाना शायद अब ना आ पाए, ये थोड़ा सा मेरे को लगता है, क्योंकि मैं भी क्या यूनिवर्सिटीज के एडवाइजरी बोर्ड वगैरह में हूँ। तो एक बात ये कि खाली टीचर ही पढ़ा रहा है, लेकिन क्या वो खाली टीचर का अहंकार नहीं है तो क्या है भाई, ये बच्चा भी दूसरे बच्चे को पढ़ा सकता है। कितना हम मिनिमम करें जो खाली टीचर को पढ़ाना है, कितना हम डिजिटल मोड में पढ़ाएं, कितना हम पीयर टू पीयर लर्निंग को बढ़ावा दें। तो कल के जो होता ना कि व्हाट गॉट यू हियर वोंट टेक यू देयर, तो जो अच्छाइयां उनको ग्रहण कर लें और नई टेक्नोलॉजी के माध्यम से उनको एम्बेड करते हुए, जैसे मैं अपनी क्लास में व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप बनाता हूँ, एक उनका लर्निंग पोर्टल बनाता हूँ, और जो आज जैसे मैंने पढ़ाया, बच्चों से कहते भाई तुम उसमें बताओ तुम्हें क्या ऐड करना है। तो इन दिस वे हाउ वी कैन इंस्पायर स्टूडेंट, और टीचर का रोल बड़ा मिनिमम सा हो जाए। मतलब इसमें क्या है कि जो जिसको टच एंड फील से करना है उस पर हम करें, और बाकी हम कैसे टेक्नोलॉजी और बाकी डिजिटल विद्या और बच्चों की खुद की पावर को इस्तेमाल करते हुए, जैसे मैं जब फ्रांस जाता हूँ पढ़ाने तो उसमें 1.5 घंटा मैं पढ़ाता हूँ, फिर 1.5 घंटे बच्चे पढ़ाते हैं। तो व्हाट आई वुड लाइक टू से कि मे बी हमें, अगर हम सोचें कि पुरानी जो गुरु शिष्य परंपरा वाला ही होगा, तो कई बार लगता है कि जिस तरह शिक्षा इतनी मतलब इतनी कॉस्टली है अमेरिका में, अगर हम उस लेवल पे आएंगे तो इंडिया की शिक्षा भी काफी कॉस्टली हो सकती है। तो शैल वी नॉट ट्राई टू डिसरप्ट मॉडल, जो है ना, डिसरप्शन इसमें क्रिएट करने की जरूरत है सर। तो ऐसा मुझे
नहीं
थोड़ा
देखिए, मेरा ये मानना है कि ऑन द स्पॉट क्रिएटिव होना बहुत जरूरी है
जी।
जैसे आप जो ये बात कह रहे हैं, मैं बाकी स्टूडेंट्स को तो एंगेज नहीं करता हूँ, लेकिन हाँ मेरे क्लासेस जो हैं वो बहुत डायलॉजिकल होते हैं। तो इनिशियल जो हम लोगों के यहाँ भी जो है वो ग्रेजुएट लेवल पे 3 घंटे के क्लासेस होते हैं, तो 1 आध घंटा जो है मैंने टॉपिक को अनफोल्ड कर दिया और उसके बाद फिर क्लास को खोल देता हूँ कॉन्वर्सेशंस के लिए, डायलॉग्स के लिए। तो इनफैक्ट मेरे क्लासेस जो हैं वो कभी 3 घंटे में नहीं खत्म होते हैं। ऋचा जी इज हियर, यू नो, शी विल वाउच फॉर दिस। वो 4 घंटे, 4.5 घंटे, कभी कभी 5 घंटे, पर्टिकुलरली अभी जब ये ऑनलाइन चीजें चल रही हैं, क्योंकि फिजिकल स्पेस में तो ये होता है कि दूसरी क्लास आने वाली है, इसमें तो वो भी कंस्ट्रेंट नहीं है।
Yes.
तो मेरा ये मानना है कि हम लोगों को ऑन द स्पॉट क्रिएटिव होना पड़ेगा, और अल्टीमेटली अगर हम ये गोल रखेंगे कि शिक्षा अच्छी और सुदृढ़ कैसे हो सकती है,
जी।
तो फिर हम उसको अचीव कर लेंगे, उसको और बहुत क्रिएटिव तरीके से करेंगे। यू नो, देयर वोंट बी एनी फॉर्मूला, बट आई थिंक इफ द इंटेंशन इज राइट वी विल बी एबल टू अचीव इट। बहुत जल्दी कर लेंगे हम लोग। तो मेरा ये मानना है।
ठीक है सर, थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Thank you. May I request Kayal Viriji to go next?
So this was a very excellent session, and it was thought-provoking. And I have 2 questions, sir. One is that you told the dual nature. Do you mean to say that we have to accept when there is a truth, untruth also, should we accept it? And the second thing is, I was not having the clarity on how a faculty should you told that before going to a class, a faculty should internalize themselves. So I could not get that point of internalizing ourselves. And I have these 2 questions, sir.
See, in quest for truth, what happens, you know, the distinction between truth and falsehood, that itself disappears. The question itself becomes moot. And just what remains is non-dual truth. You know, the truth shines without falsehood. So, you know, that's the collapse of binaries that I'm talking about. And also, because this understanding or knowledge is beyond mind and beyond speech and beyond binaries, it also becomes very difficult, you know, to actually articulate it. But it is something. It's something which can be felt, which can be experienced, which can be transmitted. I didn't get your second question. You know, I don't remember the context in which I said what I said. So I was just wondering if you could please unravel the context.
No, before going to any class, the faculty has to internalize themselves. You told that we have to be much internalized, and I could not get that point. What do you mean to say that we have to internalize ourselves as a faculty?
Yeah, not internalize ourselves, you know, but what I'm saying is that there should be such a clarity on the subject matter, you know, outside the classroom, that when we are within the classroom, we don't really have to, you know, seek for any kind of book support. It just comes to us naturally. It's so ingrained within ourselves. You know, within the Indian tradition, there's a phrase which is used, Atmasat. You know, internalized to such an extent that you have become one with your knowledge. So once again, you know, the distinction between the seeker and the sought has disappeared. And what you're teaching has become part of you. It has become an integral part of your own existence. To such an extent that even if you're woken up from sleep, you will just articulate it. So that's the kind of work that, that I was saying, that is very helpful in teaching. And, and as teachers, the more we do this, the better it will be for the kind of pedagogy that, that we're trying to perpetuate here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mamta ji, would you like to go next?
So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers and the speaker, Dr. Kundan Singh ji, for this talk. And my introduction is that I am a teacher educator, and I teach in a teacher education program where we train teachers for the primary and middle schools. So my experience is that children, when we go and observe our students' classes, so children are curious by nature. They ask a lot of questions. The problem that I often see is that their questions are shunned by the teachers. There are various reasons for that, as you said, that maybe there is this insecurity among the teachers that their knowledge is not enough. You have to be very, very confident of your knowledge, your own gyan in that sense. And the other reason could also be the large number of students. So typically in a government school, we cannot ignore the grassroots scenarios in our classroom where the classes are clubbed, and in a class you see 80 students, and there are learning gaps in those students. The students have dropped out for 6 months, 3 months, and then come back to the classes. But still, this curiosity is still there, even if the student has come back to the class after a gap. They are curious by nature, they want to know. So I think that there has to be this confidence built in our teachers, especially in the lower classes itself. For example, in the higher education system, it's much easier to do. Like when I teach in the college, it's much easier to have a dialogue with my students. I'm able to interact with them as a friend. I am able to kind of instill that confidence in them after a few classes that, okay, treat me like an equal. I'm learning with you, you learn with me, and we can have a dialogue. But in the younger students, so they first of all sense this authority of the teacher. So to instill that confidence both in the students and the teacher is very, very important.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel, that how do
Absolutely.
you do
that? I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you.
The primary,
you must have heard. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, that's what I feel, sir, that the primary teacher has to be equipped, has to be confident enough to take this dialogue forward in their classes. Even if the student strength is large, fine, that's okay. So we may not be able to teach the entire syllabus. But that should not be killed. That spirit of inquiry should not be killed, because once it's killed, by the middle school 9th, 8th standard, the children are quiet. They don't ask any more questions. They learn to sit quietly. So how do you do that? If any thoughts on that, sir?
I would say just like you say to the healers, healers heal yourself. So the teachers need to teach themselves first. It's as simple as that. It's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult profession. As I was saying earlier, one needs to be very compassionate within, and one needs to have the highest aspirations in front, in order to teach. The attributes have to be very sophisticated, interestingly. And that's how I feel. I know that this has almost become an ideal in today's age and time. But it's not that, things cannot change. It would still be good to kind of, see these ideas. May not happen in our lifetimes, but who knows, Things can shift and things can change. So I personally feel that, that for a teacher, as he or she works on the knowledge that he or she is going to impart, it is also important to do the inner work, you know, the psychological transformation. So in a certain sense, you know, a teacher also has to be very evolved in order to become an effective teacher. So that's what I feel, you know, if that addresses your question or your comment.
Thank you so much, Kundanji. Do we have further questions? I request the participants to raise hand, or you can even share it in the chat box. All right, I think there's a lot of reflection happening now, and there's so much that we take back from the session, Kundanji. Thank you so much for joining us. It was an honor and a blessing, so to say, to listen to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dhanyavad.
Thank you. Namaste. Namaste, everyone.
All right. So the next session